Anything off limits or that it makes you uncomfortable or you don't want to talk about?
We can talk about anything.
This is Inside Look. I'm Jeff Lyons, joined today by Evansville Police Chief Philip Smith. Welcome to Inside Look, Philip.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Do you prefer to be called Chief, Philip, Phil? What do you go
Philip
by?
is fine. You know, I tell people all the time that, Chief is the title that I have, but Philip is the name that my mother and father gave me, and that's the name that I try to earn.
All right. Well, let's talk about your mother and father. Where'd you grow up? Where and all that kind of stuff? Kind of walk us through early Philip Smith.
Yeah, so I'm the son of Ray and LaQuetta. My father unfortunately passed 4 years ago, so we still got mom.
Sorry.
It's six. Thank you. It's six of us, 3 boys and 3 girls. We're the Brady Bunch, except that we all come from the same nest. But grew up in Clarksville, Tennessee.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And went to Kenwood High School. Go Knights! Graduated. I spent a year of college in Jackson, Tennessee, at Lane College, a historical black college or university. And then I had a cousin who was there with me at Lane who he was from Indianapolis, and he wanted to be back closer to home. And so he kind of was the driving force, him and my dad, about me, behind me going to college. And so I said, I'll tell you what, let's find somewhere in the middle. And we found this university, Southern Indiana. It was an accredited.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Accredited university. Yeah, you were adjunct professor then.
That's right.
Are you still?
No, I gave that up.
Okay, yeah, you were doing that then. So we found this university in the middle of the two, and I came to USI, and the rest is history. I've been here ever since.
Okay, what made you want to go into service work to policing? I mean, what was the path, or what was something that caused you to say, "Hey, I want to go into law enforcement"?
Okay, you want the glamorous story? Or you want the truth?
We want the gritty one. You tell me whatever you like.
You want the truth? The truth is, I needed a job, Jeff, and they were hiring.
We all are in that boat, at some point or another.
But that's the truth. So I was working for the Evansville Vanderbilt School Corporation. Right out of college, I landed a job working as an after-school programs coordinator. I was working at Evans Middle School, putting together programs for kids, which is an interesting story, by the way, because this is in 2007 is when I started at Evans, and this story comes full circle. I remember going to different organizations around town, around that area, the general vicinity of the school, trying to find places for these kids to have, something to do after school that was positive during those at-risk hours of after school, in between, school getting let out and then mom and dad getting off work. And I remember going to all these different locations. It was great. But I remember one particular business coming to the school. I remember they called me Dr. Phil. And I remember sitting in my office one day, and the secretary called me and said, "Dr. Phil, there's a lady up front from Carver Community Organization, who wants to talk to you." And I was like, I didn't know much about the Evansville community. And so this young lady comes in. I just remember she had the biggest, brightest smile. And she told me, she says, "Hey, I want to make sure that we're doing stuff with your kids." And I thought it was so interesting because all these other places I had to go to, and this organization came to me. And I just remember her smiling. I said, "You have the brightest smile." I said, "What is your name?" And she says, "Well, my name's Stephanie Terry." And this was back in 2007.
She was just Stephanie Terry.
It was just Stephanie Terry then.
Mayor Stephanie Terry.
And I was just after-school program coordinator, Philip Smith. So it's interesting how that meeting happened way back all those years. But then I went to the alternative high school, and I did some college readiness for the kids. And both the jobs that I worked on were federal grant jobs under the Obama administration. And federal grants, as you know, they come and go.
Sure.
And I found out that the grant wouldn't be renewed. But at my time at AIS, I got to work alongside some off-duty Evansville police officers, and they thought that I had a very interesting way of working with those young people, and a couple of them.
You keep going. I'm just going to move the mic there.
Gotcha. A couple of them were like, "Hey, have you ever thought about being a police officer?" And I never did. Nothing against law enforcement. I didn't feel one way or the other. I didn't have any, negative, interactions. And actually, I remember my school resource officer when I was in high school, a guy named Sonny Goodowens, and I think he's still active down in Tennessee. But I remember him, and it was always positive. And so one of them just kept trying. He convinced me to do a ride along. And everything I thought about law enforcement was what I saw on television, high-speed chases and all this stuff that I wasn't interested in. They only show in Hollywood the rebellious cop. And I was like, that ain't me. And I get on this ride-along, Jeff, and I see what it is cops actually do and what they're called for. They're called to help, and they're called to do conflict resolution and things like that. And I'm like, That's what I do every day. I said, I can do what I saw that day. I said, I can do those things.
Yeah.
And so I applied, and now here I am.
So you go to police academy.
Yes.
What's the first thing they teach you when you walk in the door? Do you remember what the first thing was they told you?
Humility.
Well, that's a good point, though.
The first thing they teach you is humility, and they teach you. It's almost it's a paramilitary type of deal. It's almost like a break you down to build you up kind of deal. And I remember, it was only 9 people in my academy class, a very small class at the Southwestern Indiana Law Enforcement Academy. It's held in the basement of the C.K. Newsom Center. So
I was going to ask where it is.
yeah, it's in the basement of the
I
C.K.
did
Newsom
not know that
Center.
either.
And so our academy was here, and I remember. Those little bitty Kindle notebooks, like small Kindle
No, I
notebooks?
know the
remember
ones,
our
yeah.
instructor teaching us our first lesson in muscle fatigue. And his first lesson was, everybody pick up your Kindle. It's a little light Kindle. And he said, hold it out in front of you. And that's all he said. And so we had to hold that thing out in front of us. And this little bitty light Kindle, it gets heavy after a couple minutes.
Yeah.
And I remember shaking and trembling. And I remember he told us to put it down. He says, you guys just experienced muscle fatigue. Over the next couple of days, we're gonna have a lot of that.
That's a nice way to get you in the door,
that's,
right?
That's how they brought us
and
in.
I'm guessing then the next 2 days you didn't just lift Kindles.
It's physical fitness. It's push-ups. It's burpees. It's learning how to march. It's all those things that then lead into the class. What that does is it teaches you, one, that you can overcome. You can overcome the most physical things if you put your mind to it. And it also, you can overcome those things if you learn to work as a team and start helping each other. We started out as 9 strangers, and we left those 2 days of physical, fitness and stuff like that. We left a team.
What were the others like in the academy? I'm sure everybody came from different backgrounds, different reasons to be there and stuff. Was there any surprise to you? It's like when you look around the room, you're like, boy, that one's never going to make it.
Well, all 9 of us made it.
Oh, good.
And six of us were, thank you,
Yeah.
6 of us were EPD guys, and 2 were from Warwick County, and 1 was from Vincennes. Now, only one of the EPD guys, he's moved on to a different career, but everybody else in the entire group has not only gone on to their career and done different things. Everybody is a supervisor and above. Everybody's kind of, advanced in the profession at their respective agencies. Super proud of Class 1312. Some of my best friends, we're all extremely close still to this day. The guys that in my class, they work for EPD. It's interesting because I'm the chief now, but they don't talk to me like I'm the chief. They pull me to the side, Phil. Because we're Academy brothers.
Right.
It's always, you can talk to your Academy brothers in a certain way that that you couldn't talk to others, and so they keep it real with me and they keep me grounded, and I really appreciate that.
When you swear in then as an officer to protect and to serve, how does that change your relationship then with your friends, your family? Because now you're a cop, you've got the law now. So
it's very interesting. You don't really realize how interested in law enforcement people are until you become a police officer. None of these folks in my family, father, mom, brothers, none of them ever talked to me about law enforcement. Friends, and then once you become law enforcement, it's like they have all these questions. Okay, what about this?
they think you got inside information.
They think you have all the answers.
And they think you're going to share it,
Yeah.
which probably is not the case,
Well,
right?
you do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no secret. You give perspectives, different perspectives that they may not have known. A lot of people get their knowledge about law enforcement off of television, just like I did.
Sure.
Television, YouTube videos, and it just amazes me that everybody in this society, especially once they get to the age of 18, are expected to follow these laws that are enforced by law enforcement. But when are we ever taught these things? Right? They didn't teach those
Never.
things in my school. They didn't teach them in your school,
No.
I'm sure.
I remember the first time I got pulled over, and I was, speeding or something, and I was like, "What do I do? What do I do?"
I'm still nervous
Yeah.
when I see blue and red lights behind me. It's just a condition because
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I'm getting in trouble for something.
Yeah. Well, that's sometimes the case.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just pull you over, to check or I had
Well,
headlight out or
well,
something. But
I've been pulled over a couple times since I've been a cop, and one of those times I actually got a ticket. So cops do get tickets. I got proof. My young daughter, who at the time couldn't understand, she's probably about 6 years old at the time when I got stopped, and in her mind, when she saw a cop behind us, because she knows that's what Dad does, she was like, "Dad, why is he stopping us? Does he not know we're on the same team?" And that's in her mind. That's how I say, "Well, babe, I don't." He was a Kentucky State Trooper. I said, "I don't think it matters."
maybe Indiana, but
Yeah.
no. I mean, that's good in a way,
Yeah, but I was speeding. I was wrong. So,
Okay,
yeah.
well, I was too, and then I got mine. So Well, that's an interesting point. So you have children
Yes,
at home. How many?
2.
Okay. So what's that like? And I'm assuming your hours might be a little more 9 to 5 ish since you're in
Yeah.
administration, or maybe that's a bad assumption.
Well, no, you're spot on. I mean, it never kind of works out that way, but those
Well, no.
are the hours. But I actually get to spend more time with them now. But they're older now, so I'm at home more.
Right.
But they're out doing their thing now. But when I was coming up, especially when I worked for the public information office section of the police department, I was always gone.
Yeah, when I was going to back around to that.
Yeah.
So it was starting a young family and, the stress and the hours. And I'm not exactly sure how the shifts work for police officers.
Yeah, so
versus-
it's first, second, third shift. If you're a new officer, you're probably going to end up on second shift. When I got on, and it's such the dynamic has switched at our police department. We're a young department now. When I got to the Evansville Police Department, you couldn't get on day shift. You couldn't smell day shift unless you had about at least 15 years on. Like, you weren't getting day shift. You were going to seconds.
And what's second shift in the police department?
So we have 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. That's first shift,
Okay.
and then they stagger. Then there's also 7 p.m. and to 3 p.m. So you have an early squad and a late squad each day, and then we work a 4 and 2 schedule. So then there's another squad called relief squad that when those days off, when early squad's off, then relief comes in as early. When late squads come in, then relief comes in at late. Then 2 to 10, 3 to 11, then 10 to 6, and 11 to 7.
Right. So when
shifts.
you say 4 and 2, then you work 4 on, 2 off.
4 on, 2
and,
off
and
schedule.
repeat. So sometimes you're working a Sunday, sometimes you're
Yes.
working. So
Yeah, and
it
that
varies.
can be a tough schedule, but it's really nice because in the sense that, like, you only work 4 days and then you get to be off for 2. So you get you get those 2 days off, but those 2 days don't always fall off on a Friday, Saturday, which is very desirable, to people. So it rolls around to come every 6 weeks, and we're in discussions with our staff to see should we revisit this at some point. You don't want to overwork folks like that, but you also I'm really big on the emphasis of family, and having people be with their families, and I get there's value in having a random Wednesday, Thursday off or Tuesday, Wednesday off, but I also understand that most people's loved ones don't get to come into like a Saturday, Sunday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday type deal. So, maybe in the future, probably next contract or something, revisit, like, hey, you guys want to try something different, and just hear from the people and see what they want.
And what's the ladder, so to speak, in the police department? So you start, you're an officer, you're driving around town, and you're writing tickets and making peace, keeping the peace, right? Protecting and serving. And then what's the next rung up? Like what does everybody want to then move up to and up to if they want to move?
So technically, we have a merit system, so you have to test. And after so many years on, you can test for things. The first rung is corporal. You're still at officer level, but you get a little bit more responsibility. It comes with an 8% pay increase. Each merited rank comes with an 8% pay increase.
Sure.
And then after corporal, which we haven't had corporal in a while, is sergeant, which is the next rung. And so merited, actually, I'm a sergeant merited.
Okay.
And everybody in my class at 1312 is a merited sergeant as well. And then lieutenant, and then captain, then deputy chief, and there's 2 appointed positions at the police department, which is chief and assistant chief.
And what about like investigators and detectives and those? Are they somewhere in that ranking, or is that a specialty you then do once you're on the force?
So those are specialty units that you have to have at least 2 to 3 years on before being able to apply. So a lot of those are officer rank, but those specialty units also come with a pay increase, some of them, because they work longer hours. Like you got detectives, they work a 5 and 2 schedule versus a 4 and 2 schedule, and investigations can have you in the office all night long, depending on when you get them.
Sure.
And trying to work them from start to finish.
Talk about your first day on the job. Do you remember it very well?
I remember my very first run.
Okay. And what was that?
My very first run was a battery with a deadly weapon. That's the very first run. I was working third shift because when you're a new officer, you have to go through rotations. And throughout this rotations, your body's constantly changing because you have to spend 5 weeks on each rotation, right? So my first rotation was on third shift, West Sector. My very first run was a battery with a deadly weapon. That's what I hear on the radio. My training officer takes me there, and I enter the building or the dwelling where this occurred, and the first thing I see is blood everywhere. Someone that got hit with an object, and everybody was alive, but this person that got hit and knocked unconscious with an object. And I remember seeing the blood in the room, and the first thing I thought was, "This is not the academy. This is real life.
They can't train you that way.
This is the job. So you need to render aid. You need to get to make sure that the first thing is preservation of life. So we need to render aid to this person. We need to make sure, first off, you got to make sure the scene's safe. Is the suspect still around? It was a dispute between two people. The parties were separated. This guy was no longer a threat, so they made the scene safe, then rendered aid to this guy, and then, getting statements and all that stuff. And it's like, man, I got my little notepad out, getting people's names.
Your Kindle, right?
Yeah.
You can hold it now.
My little Kindle.
Yeah.
But that was my very first run.
What was your blood pressure doing?
Oh, I'm
Were your
sure.
heart pounding?
I'm sure. Oh, yes, I'm
Were you
sure.
sweating a little bit?
But it was such an interesting thing that it's like, this is like nothing I've never ever done before. And there are certain moments in your career, and there are certain runs that just stick out, and that very first one stuck out, and then the very next one that sticks out to you, a lot of times for folks. Is their first run when they're off of probation and they're allowed to be on their own.
Well, I was going to ask, so your first run, obviously you're going to be with someone
Yes.
else, but then you have to solo at some point,
Yes,
right?
I remember my very first solo run.
You want to talk about that?
I was so tactically sound. I wish that all of my academy instructors and training officers would have saw me, but I was so tactically sound. I didn't turn my gun side to anybody, and the run was a vehicle check. I just ran a VIN for a guy. I ran a VIN for a guy who had bought a new boat.
Well, that's good.
But I remember,
But you did it right.
Yeah, I did it right.
Style-wise, you did it right. Well, you talked about the first scene that you saw and how shocking that was and different from the academy. How do you compartmentalize? How do you process that? Obviously, then you leave and you've got to you got to run somebody's,
Yeah.
then, 20 minutes later or whatever. So how do officers, I'm going to say, kind of offload, decompress?
Yeah.
Do you get rid of that? I mean, do you talk to people about what you see? Because you guys see a lot of things, and women that see a lot of things that none of us hopefully will ever see. in
Yeah,
our lives.
Jeff, that is a very good question. And from my time starting at the police department versus where we are now, is we put a lot of focus on the mental health of the officer, because in the mental well-being. Because if you're not well mentally, this job will take a toll on you. So you have to be able to talk to people. We have really good chaplains at the police department. We also have a deal with the city where we have professional mental health professionals that we can talk to through the employees assistance program. We have a peer support program of people that have been there, done that can kind of talk you through those things. I am fortunate. Not everybody's fortunate to have this kind of relationship. I have a pastor who was also one of my coworkers at one point. He's my brother Ray. He also was a sergeant with the Evansville Police Department. When my dad passed away, who was a pastor, Ray resigned from the police department and took over the church. So now I have a pastor who has done the job, been at the job, that I can talk to for my spiritual guidance, who can also understand what it is that I go through. Like I can't pull the sheet over his eyes because he knows what the job is like, but he understands. And so when I can talk to him about things that I can't talk to others about.
And only other officers can truly empathize or understand, right? I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, because you've had the same experience or lived experience out
Yeah.
there. When if you're in an incident where you fire your weapon, or maybe you're fired upon, then oftentimes we'll hear on the news, so-and-so's on administrative leave pending such and such.
Yeah.
What goes on during administrative leave then?
Yeah.
Are you counseling, talking, working
So,
it
yes,
out,
you-
investigation? I mean, what
Yes.
happens?
So there's the very first thing is that we receive the officer, we get their firearm from them. Because we have to now test that for ballistics testing for the scene, because it's a criminal investigation at this point. When a weapon is fired in city limits, it can be criminal recklessness or anything. So we have to do the investigation as if we would do any other investigation. So we gather the officer's firearm. We take the officer to the hospital to where they have to submit a blood draw and. So we can see if they have anything in their system, any substances or anything like that. That officer then has to be read a Garrity warning, which is under the courts. You have to read them the warning. They can have their attorney present, and then they have to give their account of the event. to their chain of command. That officer is then placed on paid administrative leave or unpaid, depending on the circumstances of what it is. Administrative leave, and during that leave, they have to see a mental health professional. And they can have as many visits as possible, but we have to send them there so that somebody can talk to them, so they can decompress, talk through these things from a mental health standpoint, because that's a traumatic event for anybody.
Well, sure.
To go through. If all those things are cleared and everything's okay, then after 3 days they can come back. But if they need more time, we give them more time.
Had you handled guns or ever fired a shot before you became a police officer?
Not very efficiently. I did own a firearm before I became a police officer. A couple buddies that I worked with in school, we would go out and shoot. A couple of them were members of some local gun clubs, so they got me introduced to it. Yep. I didn't really do enough to know enough to even form bad habits, so I learned a lot of my habits from the police academy.
Actually, good training.
Yeah, some good training. Okay. So that helped out a lot. And honestly, I still own the first firearm that I bought, but I never use it because it's like a big bulky gun. So
I'm going to turn the tables a minute here because obviously I've been in the media my entire career. Or maybe not obviously, but I have. And sat through a lot of newscasts, right? And so typically crime stories are right up there in the top. Research tells us in news in particular that the people, our viewers, are most interested in severe weather and weather. So I think I'm golden, at least for now. But then right under that is crime, and not too far below it is education and things like that. Oftentimes on a newscast, you'll see a string of mugshots or, basically police reports that come in. Do you think that's useful in any way? Do you cringe when you're watching the news? You're like, oh, geez, they're running that again. Or does that serve a purpose? To policing effort in the community.
It absolutely serves a purpose. And yes, to all the other questions as well. Sometimes you do cringe.
I think sometimes I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think it kind of gives a perception that it's just crime-ridden. There's crime everywhere, when in fact, it's probably not the case. But people, it's kind of like if you show plane crash stories, one after the other, people think, oh, you can't get on a plane anymore. And so I always wonder about the proportion, if people then say, oh, okay, well, that guy was speeding on the Lloyd high on meth, are there a bunch of him out there? Well, there's one less because of the police department. But do you know what I'm asking here?
Yeah.
Maybe I didn't frame the question.
Well, Jeff, there's so many, and I understand the news has a responsibility to the community to let them know what's going on. They also have the understanding of what and the temperature of their audience to know what their community wants to hear. It's like, okay, I can have a story of this intersection getting new paint. New crossing line paint, but who wants to hear about that? We can just walk by and see it, right?
Right.
And news directors understand that. But there was a robbery here. That's a little bit more scintillating. So,
sure.
and it's interesting. It's like, okay, is my home in danger? Am I in danger? My kids in danger? People want to know those things. That's why it's very important on our end, from a police department standpoint, to put out the information about all the other things that we're doing, to try to be as transparent as possible, to add that information, to put out crime statistics, because those things will dispel a lot of that thing, like just the use of force, for instance. If there's a use of force that makes the news, and that seems to be all that makes the news with law enforcement, right? But if you look at the amount of incidents and interactions that law enforcement has on a day-to-day basis and compare the use of forces that you see, it's a percent of a percent of a percent. It's like a very small amount of these things happening, but if you let media guide you, then you'll think that's it. So
that's why I asked the question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you look at, and you can see it, even though you're sitting here in our comfortable studio, if you say that's awful, that's fine. That's fair, because ultimately you're the consumer. You're a little more interested news consumer, but it's a question I know that not me per se, because I'm in weather, but in news debates, does this need to run? Should it run? How should it run?
Well,
and then do follow up.
For law enforcement, it can be very frustrating, because it's like, why don't you put out none of our good stuff? But we also have to have the maturity to understand that they got a job to do. You guys have a job to do, and so do we. And so a part of our job, which is something that historically we've not been good at, is putting out the information on our terms. Giving the public what they need also. But hey, we need, that's why things like Facebook, all those social media platforms that a lot of law enforcement agencies use now, that's them kind of putting out the information on their own terms that maybe the local news outlet won't cover.
Right. And I was going to come around to that. So by my count, you've been in the policing for about 8 years? Something like
13.
that. You said 2013.
Yeah.
Okay. I heard 2007 was when you met Stephanie Terry, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So going ahead from that. So really, you've been part of the not only body cameras on your officers and on you, but also people taking video out there and then putting it the same social media that you can use, to say, hey, we're taking these kids to Disney World is the same social media where somebody can put on there an out of context video or not out of context, and people go crazy over it.
Right.
That has to be an added level of frustration and stress on an already
It comes
job.
with its challenges because the person that tells their story first on social media is right.
That tends to be the case.
And and a lot of times the best defense is a good offense. And so when you are telling your story first, then everything that we're doing to say, no, this didn't happen, is reactionary. And so people believe the first thing that they hear or saw. And so
it's hard to unring a bell.
It's hard to unring a bell.
Once it's out there, you can't do it. Did you, when you started, were we wearing body cameras yet, or did that?
So no, my first year we did not have body cam in 2013.
Right.
So my first year on department we didn't, but the very next year, 2014 is when we started. So I have at least 1 year under my belt of not having body cams, and I can tell you that I remember seeing, hearing, feeling. I remember the feeling, the sounds, the smells of the displeasure of officers not wanting to put body cam because it was the whole, whatever happened to taking an officer's word for it. But and here's the ugly truth of it. And some of my colleagues in the profession may not want to hear this. The reason we needed body cams is for two reasons. One, they showed the good work that we did do, and two, unfortunately, some of the people in this profession have lied and have done wrong. And so these body cams are kind of like a referee that show what we do on a day-to-day basis. And 99% of the officers do it right. But there's that 1% that may do something incorrectly, and the body cams keep them in check, and they also keep the public in check too, because our complaints have gone way down. If you compare the complaints that we used to get in on officer misconduct versus now when we have body cam to prove, like, no, that's not true. This officer did it the right way.
Yeah. You mentioned, first off, when we started here, you were out at Evans Middle School. You were like a resource officer, community.
Well, no, I was the after-school programs coordinator.
After-school programs coordinator. I was trying to come up with the right word. But and so you've always had an interest in kids, younger people. You've gotten to go to Disney World. You told me before we went on here you've been to all of them.
Yeah.
So talk about that. Some of the positive things that maybe we don't see or hear about the police department. First of all, why do you go to Disney World? How do you make the decision on who goes? I mean, we've run stories on it, but that must be difficult to go to these schools. It's an incentive, right, for the kids to get to go. How did that come about, and why are you so deeply involved?
So it came about because my predecessor, Billy Bolin, is a huge Disney fan, and he was approached after giving a talk one night by a local principal who had funding to take kids somewhere for a core experience, something that they wouldn't normally have, and this was state-funded money.
Sure.
And this principal convinced Billy to go, and they needed multiple chaperones, and she thought it'd be a good idea. Her name's Tamara Skinner. She's now the principal of Harrison High School. She's the principal at Glenwood then. She thought it'd be a good idea to have law enforcement go because she thought that law enforcement and the kids that went to her school didn't necessarily have the best relationship. These kids didn't have the best perception of law enforcement, and vice versa, honestly.
Right.
And so we went. They needed male chaperones, and I was a brand new officer, and but they knew me from my previous work in the school corporation, so they asked me to be one of the chaperones as well. So we go on this trip, and we expect these kids to have a good time, and they did. And we expect to have a good time, and we did. But what we didn't expect, and maybe when I say we, I had a background. I kind of had a different perspective than the others that went with me. But the others, they really had never, been with kids in that light and gotten that education from the kids' perspective of what they thought about law enforcement. And we never really spent the time to hear some of these kids' stories. And I tell you what, it was such an emotional trip. And these grown officers, these tough guys, at one point I've seen every last one of them, and even myself crying because we were just pulled to so much emotion. And when we got back, it went from we were hesitant to go in the first place to asking Miss Skinner, hey, if you guys go back, can we go again? And she was told that the state didn't really like for their money to be spent in another state, so they can't do that. And then Jason Cullum asked the question that created this program. He says, what if we raise the money? And that's how Cops Connecting with Kids was born. And it was born in a place, a genuine place of we need to connect with these kids that we're policing in their neighborhoods, because once you put a name to something, once you put a face to something, you take care of it a lot more, and you're a lot more intentional about explaining the why, and you're a lot more intentional about being present. And that's what that trip has done. It's connected us to so many families, and it's connected so many families that would have that we wouldn't have otherwise been connected to, and so many families that would have not otherwise been connected to law enforcement, to the tune that we have 2 or 3 of those kids who are now in law enforcement.
I was going to ask that question.
Yeah.
Because you've done it long enough here, 10 years, 11 years.
Yeah.
Now. What are the fruits of the labor, so to speak?
Yeah.
So you have some that have come into the force.
Yeah, we've had a couple. I know Billy Bowen just hired Lucius Wagner in Henderson PD, who's actually going to chaperone his first trip. His very
full
first
circle.
Full circle.
Yeah.
He turned 12 years old on the very first trip, and now he's going to come back and chaperone kids from Glenwood, the same school that he went to Disney with, and that's pretty cool. We have another young man who's a jailer for Vanderbilt County. We have another who's she's a jailer with Ward County, but we have several others that have started families, who have gone into professional realm, some who have donated back to this program. We've had kids. I've had former students of mine from Evans from way back when I was in there who are now parents who've had kids go on this trip that I've gotten to chaperone. And it was funny because I actually chaperone kids from Evans. Yeah. And some of the parents that were my students was like, that was my Dr. Phil. He took me to trips, too, when I was a kid. He didn't take me to Disney, but he took me to trips when I was a kid.
Right. That's pretty cool. So that must give you a great feeling that you made the right choice then in your life, well, that you folled right into basically your strong suit anyway, which was connecting with kids.
Jeff, and it makes the hard days worth it, because there's going to be a lot of hard days. And it's not as many hard days as there are good days. They just stand out to you more. It's just like anything, like with social media comments. You might see 1,000 comments that are positive, but that one comment is negative. That's the one you stare at, and it's like, man, you can't please everybody. But those, if you just stop to smell the roses, so to speak, and just think about all the good things that come, that makes it worth it.
I really appreciate you coming out here, Philip. I know you're still on duty, right? Yeah. So you didn't park on the yellow curb.
I did. I parked in the visitor.
All right, that's good. We had an executive spot for you, and I think the last time we crossed paths was at the Fall Festival.
Oh, I will never forgive you. I will never forgive you.
Sorry for that. I will go on public record here. I didn't know you didn't have a thing for pickles.
Oh my God, Jeff!
It's been a great talk here. I really have enjoyed talking to you and hearing all these things, and kind of like your folks. I'm curious about law enforcement. I've never had any of my family. I've known a few over the years, but it's good to hear your perspective and kind of give it context.
Yeah.
That's what we're all about.
Well, thank you for having me. I look up to you. You're a star, man. I used to sit on USI's campus, and I'm like, man, that's the same dude from TV, man.
You look up to me?
Yeah, man.
My goodness.
So I'm a radio television major.
Oh, I didn't know that.
My degree's in radio television.
Narrowly missed. You could have had my class.
Yeah, I know. I missed you.
Then you might have been in hosting the podcast.
I dealt with Dr. Black and some of those other guys who are now retired.
There are a few out there. Yeah, they're dropping like flies out there now. So
you guys wouldn't hire me, so I had to be a cop.
Oh, I didn't know you were trying. We would have taken in a heartbeat. All right, Philip Smith, thank you so much for being on Inside Look. If you'd like to hear all of Philip's interview again, you can do that wherever you get your podcast. You can also watch on the 14 News YouTube channel. Be sure to check out our companion podcast, What's the Trend, with Casey Mason and Aaron Weeks, that runs on Fridays. With Evansville Police Chief Philip Smith, I'm Jeff Lyons. Thanks for joining.